So now let's get into the brand new material that you'll be generating, which is the bulk of the paper on the findings and a discussion of the significance of your findings, and then finally your conclusion. What have you learned from this whole process about two things, I guess, about media research and the production of social reality, why media matters to society. And again, remember, the focus here is on how media matters to society. I'm not saying that there is not such a thing as business communication, where the question of how media can be used to promote products and companies and the like. That's a field, and they do that in business communication and marketing. That's not what we do. So, if you are simply asking questions about how can media better sell products, you're asking the wrong question. Those questions are not pertinent to the themes of this unit. It's really about how media have a society-wide impact on the way that we view things and the way that we do things in general. And that's what you need to be thinking about. But anyway, in terms of findings and discussions, so you need to do three things really in your findings and discussions. Quite simple, it sounds like. What did you find? Why is what you found significant? And how does your research contribute to media studies? So, what you need to do is you need to be thinking about how the analysis of the evidence that you've gathered feeds back into informing, either supporting or changing in some ways, ideas and concepts that are already around in media research about how media affect social life. So, one of the things that I found I think I ended up with something like 250 stories about Charlotte Crosby. Um, and what I found was that most of the stories, when I looked at thematically analyzing the story. So this is something that I did is I kind of looked at each story and I went, what is this story about? What is its main theme? And how do those themes relate to ideas about common patterns of storytelling that have been common in the history of media research on gender? And in that regard, one of the patterns I noticed was that an awful lot of the stories were about Charlotte Crosby's failed relationships, the fact that she was really, really wanting to have children, but as yet had not had one, either because, well, mainly because she couldn't find a guy who was worthy of being her baby daddy, as they say. And stories about ex-partners having children with other women, ridicule about plastic surgery. These were the most frequent sorts of stories that you read about Charlotte Crosby. And this picture here is, so she's had a long-running romance with another Geordie Shore cast member, a guy called Gaz Beadle, I think it is, certainly Gary something. And the TV show Geordie Shore, a lot of the narrative was driven by their on again, off again romance. And eventually, and the show was really about Charlotte trying to get Gary to grow up and commit to her, and he never does. But as soon as he leaves the show, he does. He finds a partner, and he's now got two children, I think. And a lot of the stories about Charlotte Crosby are about how distraught she was about the fact that she couldn't land her man, and he went off and found happiness with somebody else, and so she feels like a failure because of that, because she's still in this cycle of high profile celebrity romances that never work out, and she never really gets what she wants. And then there's also a lot of stories, speculations about the plastic surgery that she may or may not have had, and this seen as being kind of a representation of the fact that she's aging badly. And it's kind of interesting because you looked at the majority of the stories and they actually fit what I argued was they actually fit the sorts of patterns that the sorts of overall narratives that the Cultural Indicators Project had found in stories about gender during the broadcast TV era. And again, I suppose in a certain way, you can look at, by looking at the patterns of celebrity stories about her, you can see Charlotte Crosby as another indication, as a modern day version of a familiar story about the successful woman who pays a heavy personal price. So I kind of argued that, isn't it interesting that if you look just thematically, just, what you do is you gather the evidence and you say, right, there were certain themes which were common in the era of broadcast TV, and I'm going to see if I can find those same themes in celebrity stories about reality TV. And actually, yes, they are there. Now, that's not all that's there, but they are certainly there in a significant way. So, the significance of that is that older ideas and about how media tells story about gender, and older methods looking for gendered themes in TV content, those stories remain the same and the methods remain valid. So, one of the things that we have to think about, why is this significant to media studies? Well, many people think that old studies of gender in the media are of historical interest but little else. A lot of people don't even bother reading these old ideas anymore because it's deemed that things have changed so much in media industries and in culture that those ideas can't be relevant anymore. And this evidence suggests that that's not true. Suggests that it's really worth testing if old ideas about gender in the media still work. So then kind of reflect on this. What are the limitations of your research? What does all of this suggest about what you think about media, and what other kinds of research is possible? And here, one of the things that I want to say is that this is a place where you can really embrace the things that went wrong in your research. So it may well be, for example, that I kind of found evidence to support what I initially to support my initial hypothesis, but quite often, especially if you're doing interviewing, the reverse can happen. Quite often, you can go to talk to a person about a particular media thing, and you can expect that person to be interested in a particular in a particular um, uh, kind of approach to that thing. You can expect people to be driven by the same interests as you, and what you find is that people either disagree with your point of view or they want to talk about something else completely different. And one of the things that I would have to acknowledge in this research is that another body of literature out there and a whole research tradition which takes a completely opposite view of how women are represented in the media, or more specifically, how women read women, how women understand representations of other women in the media. So one of the things that I kind of argued was that Charlotte Crosby is something of a tragic figure. And one of the things that I would have to acknowledge is that there's quite a long history in media audience research of talking to women who actually find lots of positive aspects and lots of positivity to so-called tragic figures, that quite often women audiences have looked at characters in popular culture who appear to be somewhat tragic and actually really admired them. So, and certainly there is evidence from other studies of Charlotte Crosby that suggests that a lot of people really admire the fact that she just bounces back, that she's really an incredibly resilient person. And when you see all of these stories about things that go wrong for her, the thing that you need to focus on is not the things that go wrong for her, but the fact that firstly, she's still there. There aren't many TV stars who manage to maintain their fame for over a decade. And secondly, she always moves on from success to success. She has forged a remarkable business success. She is remarkably open about talking about her problems. She isn't obsessed with her own image. I mean, she's perfectly happy for people, for the public to see her when she's not at her best, either physically or emotionally, and this all kind of bounces off her. And this is seen as actually being a really positive capacity to have, a set of skill set to have in the context of, well, a lot of people have talked about Charlotte Crosby as a really interesting symbol of austerity Britain, of a society in which the futures for a lot of young people looks really bleak. And she's become, to some people, something of a standard bearer for how to manage that situation. So another thing you might say is, well, I've done this content analysis, but what I can't tell from my content analysis is how the people who love Charlotte Crosby interact with her. How do they read her? So maybe I would want to go off and ask some people what they think about this media content, not just look at the content itself. So, in this last section, embrace the fact that you might be wrong, because it's only that when you think about the things that you haven't thought about and the things that you might have been wrong about that you grow. There'd be no point in doing research if all we ever did is we went out and we found out exactly what we expected to find. Um, we'd never learn anything new, we'd never say anything new. And more importantly, if you go out and find exactly what you expected to find, if you had no problems at all, you probably did it wrong. No one ever, the path to good research is never ever smooth. So really try and think about things that you would have done better. Don't think that you have to argue that you did the perfect study to get the marks that you want. We can learn so much from the things that went wrong. So in this last section, just be really, really open about things you didn't think about, things you'd like to do if you had more time, things you'd like to do if you had more resources. So that's the end of well, I guess of the unit. Thanks for hanging out with me. And hopefully, this is a fairly clear guide to what I want to see in the final assessments. And I'll be seeing you next week, and I'll be available um, to field any questions that you might have about this. So, best of luck, and I'll see you in class.